I will do some brief introductions, talk a little bit about the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards, and then we will get to our program for today. Okay, so my name is Dr. Melanie Meinzer, and I am the director of the new Office of Student Fellowships and Awards at UTEP. And this is an office that was created to work with students who are applying for prestigious national and international fellowships and awards, many of which are for graduate study. In advertising this event, I sent it to students in all colleges with the GPA of 3.7 and above, looking for students who are freshmen all the way through seniors. So if you're a freshman and this is your first time learning about Rhodes, welcome. It's great to know about these from the start of your college career. Similarly, if you're a junior or a senior, you're also catching this at the right time to apply for the 2021 cycle, which the deadlines are in September and October of 2021. And I'm joined today by Morgan Robledo. So Morgan, if you can wave to everyone. This is Morgan. She has been working with my office for about 6 days now. So she is new and we're very happy to have her. She is our undergraduate assistant. So she is also someone who's a point of contact for the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards. I'm joined also today by Dr. Gail Arnold, who is the director of the Medical Professions Institute at UTEP and also our Rhodes Scholarship campus advisor. And then also by Major Timothy Justice, who is our special speaker and guest today. And I'd like to give a brief bio just so that you know who you'll be hearing from. So Major Timothy Simmons Justice is an assistant professor of economics at the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York, where he teaches courses on economics and econometrics in the Department of Social Sciences. He's also a research analyst for the Office of Economic Manpower and Analysis, and he holds a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he wrote his dissertation on health and healthcare utilization for military beneficiaries. Other research interests include the effects of education and gender on health and labor market outcomes. Major Justice holds a MPhil in Development Studies from the University of Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. So welcome, Major Justice. So we look forward to hearing more about his experiences both as a Rhodes Scholar and then what that has done, what advantages and what that has opened up for him in his career, having this network. And not in the least the degree that you get while a Rhodes Scholar, but what happens afterwards. So we look forward to that. We have a few upcoming events, which you can find on MindTracker. So you have to log into MindTracker, and then you can search for the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards. And we have coming up in October a graduate school funding workshop next Wednesday, October 14th. There is also the week after that, on October 21st, an information session for DAAD Rise Germany. So if you are in a STEM field and you're looking to a research internship over the summer, you can come to that info session. And then we also have another scholarship information session for the Mitchell Scholarship, which is similar to the scholarships we're going to talk about today. So I encourage you, if you're interested in the scholarships we talk about here, to come to the Mitchell session, which will be on Wednesday, October 28th. So I will now share my slideshow here. Let's see. Okay, so can you please put, actually, Morgan, can you just give me a thumbs up if that's showing up for you? Okay, perfect. And I'll just assume everyone else can see it too. Okay, so today we are talking about the Rhodes Scholarship, Marshall, and Gates Cambridge scholarships, but I'll also keep Mitchell in that category because if you end up applying for one of these, Mitchell should also be on your radar. Actually, change slides. Okay. All right, so the first question that I often get asked about these scholarships is, what are they looking for? So there are some common themes across the scholarships and what makes an applicant competitive for it. So the first is an outstanding academic record. Some of these scholarships say that starts at a 3.7 GPA. Typically, most of the awardees have a GPA of 3.8 or higher. But it's important to remember that this is just the very basis of applying for these scholarships. So they look for many other things in addition to a solid GPA. The next is an exceptional track record of service and leadership, could be at the domestic or international level. And I put here from early in one's university career. And what I mean by that is from your freshman year onwards, are you seeking out ways to get involved in undergraduate research? Are you taking internships, campus employment, other things that are getting you the types of experiences that by the time you enter your junior, senior year, you're engaged in some very significant leadership roles. The next is, and goes along with that, seeking out those types of experiences, is having significant accomplishments in research, athletics, or the arts. And so athletics, for those of you who know about Rhodes, you know the reputation of Rhodes may be that you're the neuroscientist who's also a triathlete or something like that. But what they're getting at, and I think they would reject that characterization for a large part. And what they're really getting at, and what the message is around why these other non-academic aspects of an application are important, is because you're showing that you have these energy, these talents to to really go out there and achieve the things that you're studying and going on in your career to do. So it's more about well-roundedness than being the state track champion, for example. Next is a strong vision for how your career will have a positive impact on the world. Think of this as service. Think of this as leadership combined with an idea of what you will use your training and your education for. And then finally, I put here, you have to have a strong rationale for pursuing a particular graduate program in the UK at a particular university. For Rhodes and Gates Cambridge, this is more straightforward because those are based at particular institutions. But for the Marshall Scholarship, for example, you can study at a range of UK institutions. And so you really have to make a case for why you chose this particular degree program. Who are you going to work with? And why is it important that you study in the UK? As you look ahead to the 2021 application cycle, there are a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind. The first is that these scholarships, except for the Gates Cambridge, so I listed here, students must apply for and receive the UTEP nomination to apply for the Rhodes, Marshall, and Mitchell scholarships. So that's why we group them together. Let me provide a little bit of background on that. So these funding agencies, if they did not have a campus nomination process, would receive far more applications than they could ever review, far more candidates than they could ever interview. And so they ask that students, universities do the first round of selection. And so this is what the process looks like at UTEP. In late May, if you're interested in applying for one of these by nomination scholarships, you'll fill out a preliminary UTEP application, which will be somewhat of a kind of a mini version of the questions that you see on the full application for these scholarships. So you'll write a short statement, a personal statement, you'll provide a transcript, a resume, and I'll ask you also to start thinking about who your recommenders will be, who will write these letters of reference for your application. So that's due at just after the end of the semester, May 26th. And then over the summer, you can, once you've submitted that application, you then get on my list for workshops that we have, writing the personal statement. I can also, once I see your preliminary application, have an idea of which mentors can I match you with so that you can get that one-on-one coaching throughout the summer as well. So over the summer, you work on your application, and then at the end of August, you will submit your completed, so that's everything. That's all of the essays, all of the materials for Rhodes, Marshall, and Mitchell Scholarship applications. You'll submit those to my office, Office of Student Fellowships and Awards. From there, the competitive applications will then be sent to the nominating committee at UTEP, which will choose which candidates they want to interview. If you're invited to interview, you prepare as you would as if you were interviewing for the Rhodes Scholarship or the Marshall Scholarship. And then after that interview, if you receive the campus nomination, then we write a letter of endorsement that goes with your application, which is a required piece of the application. And by the end of September, early October, you're submitting your final application to the funding agency. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 3 scholarships in the title today. And I want to add here too, we will have time for question and answer after Major Justice's remarks. But if you have questions throughout, please keep them. You can put them in the chat and we will talk about them when we get to the question and answer part. But I also want to kind of frame what we're going to talk about today. We're going to present a very limited introductory view to these fellowships. So if you want to know more, if you're interested in applying to one or more of them, I encourage you go to their website, read about eligibility, make sure that what you want to study is on the list of eligible courses. So this is just to give you a sense of what are these scholarships, what are they for, what can you do with them? And then the rest of the process is what you pick up and make sure that this is the right type of scholarship for you. Okay, so let's start with the Marshall Scholarship. And Marshall is a bit closer to my heart because when I was just starting out after college, I worked at the British Consulate in Boston, so then worked with the Marshall Scholarship in the New England region, and I administered the selection process. So I have a bit of a view into how it works, but it was a while ago. So I want to tell you a little bit about what the scholarship is and what you can do on it. There are up to 50 Marshall Scholarships awarded each year to American students to study for a graduate degree at a range of institutions in the UK in any academic field. So this is important to remember. A lot of the times these scholarships are known to students in the liberal arts, particularly students interested in public service, but it really is, and they are looking for candidates across all fields. So the program is funded by the UK Foreign Office as a thank you for the Marshall Plan. And its goals are to strengthen future US leaders' ties to the UK. So this is an important dimension of a Marshall application, is that you're not only pitching yourself as a future leader and somebody who's academically solid, but also somebody who's going to contribute to the US-UK relationship in your area. So that's something to mark in your application to show an awareness of that as being a priority. Thinking again of if the money's coming from the UK Foreign Office, this is part of their public diplomacy. Eligibility, this is an award that's open to US citizens at the time of application. You have to hold your first degree, so you'll get used to a lot of the British terms as you read about these. I put in parentheses, that's a bachelor's degree from a university in the US. Minimum GPA is 3.7. They do not allow rounding up. And another aspect of eligibility, which I think is really helpful for, especially for students who are graduating this year, if you didn't apply in the most recent cycle, you are actually eligible to apply if you meet the graduation date cutoff. So for the 2021 cycle, you have to have graduated after April 2019. So you can apply also as a recent graduate. And you also cannot hold a degree from a British university. The award benefits, this will look very similar across the scholarships we'll talk about today. It's comprehensive. You're basically getting a full ride degree plus living expenses. The Marshall covers university fees, living expenses, other travel and research expenses, travel to and from the US, and also possible but not necessarily included is support for a dependent spouse. In the application, you will write a series of short answer essays, about 300 to 500 words, on your proposed program of study, what you plan to do after the award, leadership, and ambassadorial potential. Also standard across these applications is the personal statement. This is the centerpiece of pretty much every scholarship or fellowship application, aside from a statement of purpose. So the 2 main essays that you might write for fellowship would be the personal statement and a statement of purpose. In this case, that will be the 1-page summary of your proposed academic program. But this is how the committee knows what they know about you. And so it's very common for students to go through 5 to 12 drafts of these essays. That leads me to the second part of the slide here, which is what resources are available at UTEP as you go through this process. You read the criteria for the essays, you start drafting, and then what? How do you get feedback? You can go to the University Writing Center. They can help with at any stage of the writing process. You can attend personal statement workshops through my office, the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards. And you can also talk to your mentors. So this is where I say absolutely get as many people involved as you can. Talk to your advisor, professors, research mentors, and you can also request a application essay mentor through my office, and we will give you the names of people that you can reach out to and say and ask for feedback on your essays. And there's also, of course, with the Marshall Scholarship and all of these letters of recommendation. The Marshall Scholarship selection process, the criteria, this will start to look very repetitive across the scholarships. That's why we group them together. They're looking for academic merit, academic excellence, leadership potential, and then I think this is quite distinct to the Marshall, and they want to hear about ambassadorial potential in the US-UK relationship. Similar to Rhodes, the Marshall Scholarship works with regions. So students can apply either in the region where they live, so their permanent home address, or the region where their university is. So if you are, for example, if you were from Boston but didn't want to apply, and this happened all the time with the Marshall, students didn't want to apply against students who were also at Harvard, MIT, Yale, and so they would apply in their home district. So there is a little bit of gaming that maybe goes on with this because the awards are distributed among the regions, and depending on the region you interview in, that can determine your likelihood of getting an award. So our region in El Paso is the Houston region, which you can see here. And so if you have an address outside of this region, you should also think about maybe applying there, just see what that looks like for you. Okay, so that was the Whirlwind Marshall, and let's talk about Gates Cambridge. So part of the reason that we have Gates Cambridge on here is because we're looking for scholarships also for students, for international students. So many of these scholarships, the first criteria is US citizen, but Gates Cambridge is one of the scholarships that does not require US citizenship. It's open to a citizen of any country outside of the UK. I want to note also that nomination is not required for the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. They do not ask us to do an initial review of candidates. That being said, if you are interested in applying for Gates Cambridge, I still encourage you to work with my office, go through the process of filling out the preliminary application, submitting your full application, and getting the chance to go through an interview with the campus committee, because that's also an opportunity to get feedback. And believe me, this is what students at universities across the US are doing. So if you can take advantage of these resources, absolutely do it. Gates Cambridge has about 80 awards. Most of these, it's weighted heavily towards PhDs. So you can see here at the bottom point, most of them, 2/3, are for PhD students. And this program was established in 2000 with a donation from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's only for study at the University of Cambridge. Eligibility, citizen of any country outside the UK, looking to do a degree, one of these below, PhD, master's degree, 1-year postgraduate course. So there are a list of courses that are eligible and those that are not on the Gates Cambridge website, so I encourage you to check that as well. Benefits are very similar to the Marshall: tuition, allowances for travel, also possible additional funds for conference travel and a family allowance. The application process is a bit different from Rhodes and Marshall. For Gates Cambridge, you are applying to Cambridge University to your particular course of graduate study. So what that will look like is you'll fill out the normal application, but in the funding section, you'll add some additional answers to questions that they provide here. So the admission section, that's where you're applying to the specific graduate degree program at the University of Cambridge. In the funding section, if you want to be considered for Gates Cambridge, you'll write a 500-word essay on how you meet the Gates Cambridge criteria, which I'll show you on the next slide. Or did I already show you that? No, okay. So I'll show you that on the next slide. And for PhD applicants, you'll write a research proposal and you'll provide a recommendation or a reference. And the criteria here, again, very similar. You're going to want to make the case for why that particular course and why you. So what in your preparation and training has led you to be the perfect candidate for this course. Also, again, service, a commitment to improving the lives of others, and then leadership. Selection process looks a bit different from Marshall and Rhodes, and Marshall and Rhodes is where you have regional committees and then interviews. Here in Gates Cambridge, it's done within the departments. So first you're ranked by among the other candidates who applied for admission into that program at Cambridge, and you're ranked only based on academic ability. Second, a university-wide committee will evaluate applications based on these criteria that you see on the screen here. And then finally, there are interviews followed by final selection. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Arnold to tell us about the Rhodes Scholarship.
Okay, thank you. As I was introduced earlier, my name is Dr. Gail Arnold, and I am currently the director of the Medical Professions Institute. You'll see an array of stuffed triceratops behind me, and that's because my PhD is actually in geological sciences. I'm a geologist by training, but in that academic path, I was also a Fulbright scholar. And before moving to El Paso, I had lived in Denmark. And so if anyone has any questions about what it's like to live abroad or study abroad for an extended period of time, I'm always happy to talk to you about those things, no matter which scholarship or fellowship you may be applying for. So today I'm here to talk to you about the Rhodes Scholarship. So the Rhodes is actually one of the oldest and most celebrated international fellowships that you can receive in the world. It was originally established by Cecil Rhodes to promote unity between English-speaking nations and instill a sense of civic-minded leadership. And so your civic-minded leadership, your service is a very large part of who you are if you're going to apply to the Rhodes. The Rhodes is awarded to 32 recipients in the US per year, and that's divided up among 16 districts. So 2 recipients per district. For us, our district is Texas and Oklahoma. And as with other awards you've heard about today, you can either apply from your home district or from your university district, but chances are for most of you, that is Texas and Texas. Oh, next slide, please. So the benefits of the Rhodes, like many of the other ones you've heard about today, it covers all your university and college fees, including your application fee to Oxford University, and it provides you with a living stipend. But unlike some of the other awards you've heard about today, that is for a single person. There is no support for spouses in this. A spouse is welcome to come with you if you have one, but the Rhodes does not provide any extra benefits to provide for that spouse. In addition to your living stipend, of course, they do provide the airfare to Oxford at the beginning of your fellowship and your return flight. And your fellowship is generally for 2 years. So there is a 3rd year potential extension depending on the degree program you've chosen. And this happens, right? We have many Rhodes awardees who are actually pursuing a doctorate, and that is generally a 4-year path. You can apply for the doctorate, but you need to be aware that you are fully responsible for that 4th year, if not for the 3rd year beyond the 2 years the Rhodes generally provides. For eligibility, you must be a US citizen or permanent resident, or a US resident with DACA status. So it is specified. So if you are a DACA student, and all of this is established for you by April 15th in the year of the application, that meets the eligibility requirement for the Rhodes. You must be at least 18, but not yet 24 by October 1st in the year you're applying. And as I mentioned already, you're either going to apply through the state or district where you were a resident on April 15th in the year of application, or where you will have at least had 2 years of college education and received your bachelor's degree before October 1st in the year of application. And like the Marshall, it has a minimum GPA of 3.70, so no rounding. So if you have a 3.69, that is not a 3.70. But this is the minimum, and generally you will find that competitive applicants have a higher GPA than the minimum. Next slide, please. I find the Rhodes application to actually be a rather short application, and that in and of itself is a challenge. So your application will include a full CV, so including your academic qualifications, your leadership, any awards or scholarships you've received, any of your community activities, and this CV cannot exceed 2 pages. In addition to your CV, you will provide a personal statement, again, not to exceed 1,000 words. These are pretty common metrics for all applications. And this, between your CV and your personal statement, this is all you have to tell the personal story of you, your dedication to service, your academic excellence, how you meet all of the selection criteria for the Rhodes. And so it's important to think carefully about how you write these things. And another unique aspect of the Rhodes is that for your personal statement, this statement must be wholly and only yours. So where generally we would recommend that you use the UTEP Writing Center, that you do many drafts with a mentor, you can't do that with the Rhodes. You have to certify that you and only you have written this and that you've received no editorial feedback whatsoever. And so there are lots of ways we can assist you with this, but this is one distinct difference about this application. You'll also provide an official transcript and a university letter of endorsement, and that is facilitated through the UTEP Office of Students of Fellowships and Awards. Minimum 5, up to 8 letters of recommendation, and most Rhodes applications do have those 8 letters of recommendations, but at least 4 of these must be from faculty that you have received instruction from. And so again, another important consideration as you look forward to apply to this is who are you going to ask to write these letters for you? And are you sure you have a solid and strong relationship with all of those faculty members? Next slide, please. And so the criteria for the selection process, right? So academic excellence, that's sort of a theme across the board for any fellowship that you're going to apply for. And what they're really looking for, and that's what's bold at the top, right, is outstanding intellect, character, leadership, and commitment to service. And how they assess these things is through that personal statement and through that CV, looking for your commitment to service, right, to your community. I like the word unselfishness in this second bullet point, right? And to have what they call the force of character, right? The willingness and the strength to lead and take an interest in your community and those around you. And again, it's not really explicitly stated in these criteria here, but they are looking for that whole roundedness as well, right? You may be academically excellent. You may have a strong devotion to service, but they are also looking for the wholeness of you is what in arts or in athletics or other cultural activities have you engaged in that round you out as a human being? And again, specifically the Rhodes is to study at the University of Oxford. So why the University of Oxford and why this is the place that you need to be at? Thank you.
Unmute myself. Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Arnold. And so now we're going to move to hear from Major Destis about his Rhodes experience. I'm going to leave it open-ended. I purposefully did not say, talk about this. So I want to hear just what he has to share with us, just to give you a sense of the audience. We have students from across all majors at the university, freshmen through seniors, weighted more towards juniors and seniors. But welcome. And so I turn it over to you. And then at the end, we'll do some question and answer.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Awesome. So I'm going to start by just giving a little bit more background, I guess, about where I come from, why I was invited to speak today, and how the application process went, and then what the scholarship has kind of meant for me and for my career. And I'll try to give maybe a little bit of advice. So I am now, as Melanie mentioned, a professor at West Point at the United States Military Academy in New York, and I was also an undergraduate at West Point. My family is sort of a military family. Both of my parents actually were Army aviators. My father was a Black Hawk pilot. My mother was a Huey pilot. And my uncle was a non-commissioned officer in the Air Defense Artillery. So he spent a large part of his career at Fort Bliss and has retired to El Paso. And I have a large amount of family in El Paso. So my home of record is El Paso. My mailing address, I vote in El Paso. That's I spend a lot of time there. I don't actually live there. I've never actually lived there, but that's where all my family has sort of ended up. And I went to high school outside of Austin, Texas, at Cedar Park High School, and I ran track there. And after 9/11, decided to go ahead and apply to the United States Military Academy, as a number of my classmates did. Were kind of motivated by that event, felt a call to serve, to contribute in some way. It was a national moment that there was a kind of unity of feeling, I think, across party lines that I haven't really seen since. So there were a large number of applicants with my cohort. I graduated from high school in 2003. And, I was a good student, but I wasn't the type of high achieving student. I didn't show up to West Point thinking that I would go on to graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't know what I wanted to kind of do with my life. I wouldn't say that I totally lacked direction, but I would say I was focused more on running and athletics than on academics. So a part of what attracted me to West Point actually was that I was recruited to be on the track team there. And during my freshman year, I started to see that the athletic competition actually in the NCAA was much greater than it was at the high school level, at the 4A high school level in Texas. And that I was, competitive, but sort of middle of the pack competitive. And I started to get interested in the coursework that I was taking. It was a lot more rigorous. I went to a public high school. So the coursework was a lot more rigorous than what I was used to. And I took economics as a sophomore, actually. So I had initially declared my major to be engineering management, very practical, kind of a project management sort of a studies. And so I was an engineering management major. And then during my freshman year, they announced that a senior had won the Rhodes Scholarship. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool. This guy gets to go to Oxford. He gets to go live in England and pursue, the life of the mind for a couple of years before coming back and joining the Army. And I found that really appealing. And then I sort of fell in love with economics. And I shifted my focus to academics to some extent because I really cared about my major. I really cared, once I switched majors to economics, about social science and about this idea that we can use econometrics and we can use data to uncover facts and try to quantify and understand our world a little bit better and solve problems that we all have. And so West Point has a program similar to the program that Melanie is running now, where they would bring people in who had a 3.7 and they would say, hey, you're eligible to apply for these things. You should think about it. You should take the next couple of years and find some mentors, and it should be on your radar. And so about my sophomore year, I really buckled down and brought my grades up because my GPA was not high enough at that point to compete for these scholarships. And without that kind of nudge, I never would have thought that I was competitive. And I'll just be upfront. I graduated with a 3.78. So I met the cutoff, but I was not the valedictorian. I was not number one academically. And I think that speaks to the Rhodes sort of selection criteria. So Gail kind of listed some of those. They have kind of 4 areas that they're looking at. And you can go back and read those. But there's a phrase that they used to use, I don't know if it's featured as prominently, that kind of sums up what they're looking for. And it's the thing that I think makes the Rhodes most unique. One of the others is this sort of focus on athleticism, which I think has faded a little bit. You don't have to be an NCAA athlete. I would say it's helpful to have some sort of pursuit that gets you out of doors, something where, you know, whether it's hiking, climbing, cycling, kayaking, bird watching, you know, whatever it is, if it gets you outdoors and it's something that requires movement and awareness of your body, you know, yoga, whatever it is, you want to be able to speak to that in your personal statement and be able to talk about it in an interview. Although I do think the emphasis on that has been somewhat reduced over the last 15 years. But the phrase that I want you to take away from this talk, if there's anything you remember from everything that I say, is how will you fight the world's fight? That phrase, fight the world's fight. It speaks to both your own passion as well as the fact that it's not for you personally, that it's how you're going to serve the world in some way. And it speaks to the fact that you need to have like a larger vision, and that includes leadership. So it's about a passion for changing the world in some way, for serving some underserved community, for solving some problem, and doing that through leadership, and hopefully tying that into where did you come from, what are your values, where are you going, and how does the scholarship fit into your journey and your vision. So let me take it back a little bit to my own story. I said I really kind of fell in love with economics, this rigorous sort of applied empirical study where we try to uncover facts, right? We try to figure out this causal relationships in the world. So it's not about necessarily predicting, but it's about understanding relationships, things that cause other things, so you can influence policy. You can pull the right policy levers, you can fix the right things that will then improve outcomes. So it ties into public policy, helping people, and I've continued to study that particularly through healthcare. I would say the process of thinking very deeply about who you are, where you came from, kind of what your personal story is, and what your vision is a valuable process. So you can pour a lot of hours and a lot of time into putting together this very short application, but even if you are not selected, even if you, let's say, get an interview, but then are not selected, that reflective time that you spent is valuable time because it will feed back into what you end up doing in the future, hopefully in a positive way. I think if I had not gone through that process, I would never have gone back and gotten a PhD in economics. I would never have become an academic and done research. And I would just have a very different life journey. And that's partially attributable to the Rhodes Scholarship, but it's also just the hours that I spent as an undergraduate thinking about what is it about this that interests me? How can I use it? And how do I see myself doing this in the future? And it's not that you have your life path mapped out, but you've really thought about who you are, what you value, and what you're passionate about. That is the hardest part of the application. It's getting that personal statement right. It's only 1,000 words. You've got to convey a lot. You've got to convey all those things that I've talked about. You want to show that you're accomplished in your field to some extent. That's kind of taken care of by your letters of recommendation and by your CV, by your resume. You've got to put the stuff in there that can't be conveyed by those other things. So I'll tell you a story. When I was putting my application together, I went through several drafts of a personal statement. Started out really bad. And I had something that was ready to submit. This was like the day before the application submission. And I was, crossing my T's, dotting my I's. And the equivalent of Melanie at West Point at the time, his name was Major Gallagher, and he was like the scholarship director. He was walking around the room, and he saw my computer desktop background, which was a Rembrandt drawing that I had seen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There was like a traveling exhibition of sketches by Rembrandt, and this one had spoken to me and kind of meant a lot to me. I think it's called The Three Trees, if you're interested. And there's nothing in my essay about appreciation for art or interest in drawing, which I had. And he told me I had to put it in there, and I was like, but it's going to be so shoehorned in, and it feels false, and it's so there's this balance. You have to put your best foot forward. You have to sell yourself, and often it's really hard to see yourself and to see what you're passionate about and what you care about, and that it's valuable. But I think if I had not put, what I ended up writing in the essay was my interpretation of this drawing, and it was about kind of the power of nature and the humility that we should have in our dealings with the globe, and really the problem of climate change, which has not been sufficiently dealt with, obviously. And they challenged me on it in the interview, on my interpretation. And I think that putting that in there set me apart from other applicants and from other West Point applicants. So let me just talk about a couple of other things. You really do want to have all 8 of those recommendation letters. The perception, if you have fewer than 8, is that there aren't 8 people out there who are willing or to recommend you, or that there aren't 8 people who are worth hearing from. And those could all be professors. I would recommend having a few who are not. I would recommend having some that are community leaders, mentors, coaches. I had the chief of staff. I interned one of the summers for a government agency when I was an undergrad, and the chief of staff wrote a recommendation letter for me. So I would start thinking now about who those people are. If you're even if you're a junior now, you still have time to think about lining up an internship or lining something up to get somebody who's not a professor. So I think you got to think a little bit strategically about those things, but for the most part, it's the force of who you are, your story, and your passion that's going to carry the day. The other thing I'll say, if you do make it to the interview stage, there's 32 winners, there's 16 regions. I think typically they interview 10 to 16 per region. So in that region, if you make it to that group, everybody who's being interviewed is qualified. Everybody who's being interviewed is very impressive on paper. What they want to find out in the interview is that you are confident in who you are, right? That you're authentic, that you are capable of carrying on a conversation, that you're interested in the world around you, and that you have opinions, and that you are willing to share those opinions. So you'll be asked, to come down on a political issue on one side or the other. And I've seen students that are really afraid to make a statement, that they instead will just analyze the issue and talk about how they analyze it. So the whole weekend is important. There's a formal interview. It's very short. It's 30 minutes or less. It goes by very quickly. But there's also probably going to be like a cocktail party and a dinner, and each of those is also part of the interview. So I would encourage you to practice that in advance. I think that's really everything I wanted to talk about. I know that was a little bit scattershot. I can talk about some other examples of kind of great visions and things that I've seen. So I've seen students who are very interested in climate change that are like I'm talking about one student in particular who I mentored, who's studying physics, really physicist at heart, wanted to go on and study fusion. I've had somebody else who wanted to study, solar technology and battery technology. I had another very impressive candidate who was from Puerto Rico and was really interested in in immigration law. So although Puerto Ricans are Americans, and so she wasn't an immigrant, but she was very interested in immigration law and in the status of migrants, and she wanted to go study, migrant and refugee studies. And her long-term plan was to become a lawyer and serve underrepresented communities, to kind of represent people who don't have a lot of money to represent themselves in court. And then another friend of mine was pre-med as an undergrad, was planning to go to med school, wanted to be a specialist in infectious diseases, and wanted to study malaria, wanted to discover a vaccine for malaria. And actually, he is now a MD PhD at Harvard at Mass General Hospital, and is studying that very thing, which is also what he studied at Oxford. So those are just some quick examples. I guess I'll open it now for questions. If any of that would kind of spark your interest, or if you have other questions for me, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. And I enjoy hearing about that too. And I like that you said you didn't have, that you got more serious about academics as you were in college, because I think that when you look at somebody's record and you see they've done all these amazing things, you just assume that they were doing that from birth, but we all go through our processes of developing and discovering what we want to do. And so I think that that's really what I love to hear about in these firsthand from scholars. And then just also what you were able to do. And I think the stage that you're at now, and it's just so, I think absolutely the reflective process is so valuable, whether selected or not, right? So I think that's across the board. So let's turn it over to some questions for our guest. If you have any general questions about the scholarship, I can chime in on those or point you in the direction for resources. But let's get some questions just for Major Justice about his experience. Anything that you want to ask, please feel free to put it in the chat, or equally, you can unmute yourself and just ask your question. It always takes, there's always a little bit of a, a lag between there, but let me see if I can make sure. Okay, so you can unmute yourself, so feel free to do that if that's what you'd like to do. So while we wait for questions, I'll pontificate a little bit more then. So responding to some of the things that Major Justice has said, I think that the way we want to think about scholarships, so today we've talked about these 3 scholarships that are highly competitive. Oftentimes, I think when I was a student, I thought of these as, oh, that's an honor that I want, or I want a Fulbright, or I want this because I want that honor, as opposed to kind of seeing it as the end goal, as opposed to a means to an end. And so I think as you're going through your college career and you're thinking about what you want to do next, to do what he's talked about, which is to really reflect, to use the writing process to reflect on what's important to you, what you really want to do, articulating that for yourself, and then thinking of scholarships and fellowships as a means to achieve your goals. So if you want to do a master's degree in public health, maybe this is one way, but if that's your goal and you know what you want to do after that, that is far more valuable than any one scholarship happening to choose you for this award. So that's what I'd like to just sort of flip that in a way for students. And then also want to raise for students who are freshmen and sophomores that you want to keep in mind when you are a junior, you'll want to apply for the Hawkins Scholarship, which is a new award created by UTEP President Heather Wilson, also a Rhodes Scholar. And she created this award so that students at UTEP would be getting those experiences that would allow them to build up to these leadership roles when they're seniors. So look up the Hawkins Scholarship. The deadline is in October, coming up next October 2021. And so very similar to the Rhodes, the criteria we use are actually the same as the Rhodes. So you can think about this as a way of building up, and the award is for $10,000. Okay, so we have a question from Vanessa. How did you decide that the Rhodes Scholarship was the one that would benefit you most compared to the other ones mentioned?
Okay, so for me, I don't know how you handle it, Melanie, at UTEP, but the scholarship kind of program director at West Point helps direct you to which scholarships you're going to apply for, because the institution has to write letters of recommendation, and they're kind of managing who's applying in which region and these sorts of things. In some sense, it was decided for me. So I also applied for the Marshall. I also applied for the Fulbright, and I did not get a Marshall interview. So I was not competitive for the Marshall. My perception is that the Marshall was a little bit more academically focused, and I had done some research as an undergraduate, but I hadn't published anything. I hadn't really worked as a research assistant, and so I just wasn't as competitive for that scholarship, and I didn't get an interview. The Fulbright I may have been successful with, but the sort of sequence was that the Rhodes selection process came earlier, and so I withdrew my application after I was selected for the Rhodes. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer.
I think in a lot of cases, it starts with knowing about the options that you have. So Fulbright should absolutely be on your list as well, if you're applying for the Rhodes or these other ones. And sometimes, so it helps to read the criteria. It helps to apply for multiple awards. Oftentimes, what I tell students is you look at the basic criteria. If you meet the eligibility criteria and you want to do it and you can articulate a case for yourself in terms of what they're asking for, so why Oxford or why Cambridge, if you feel that you can come up with those answers and that you can stand behind them, then I say apply, because you never know what the committees are looking for. Committees change, they vary from region to region. Every scholarship is slightly different. There's, of course, what they say on the website, which is far more general than what the committee may be looking for at any given point. So it's all about maximizing your odds, but being strategic about how you spend your time. So if someone could look at your application and say, well, they could study this anywhere, well, then maybe that should be a question that you ask yourself. Should there be a different award that I apply for? Is this really, am I going to be a competitive candidate for this scholarship based on all of the information that they've given me, which is the essay questions all hint at what they're really trying to hear from you, right? And so eligibility, essay questions, you start to work on the application. If you find, hey, this isn't the right one for me, then you move on to different fellowships. But it's a bit of an exploratory process. And my office is here also to give you advice as you're starting these applications. There are also, we're going to produce some materials that you can look at and say, okay, I'm interested in STEM or public service. What are my options within this field? Let's see, so we have time for more questions, so feel free to put them in the chat. Please don't be shy. This is a great opportunity to ask a real live Rhodes scholar that we have right here any questions about the Rhodes, about studying at Oxford, about a career afterwards. So any and all of it.
I can give a little bit more advice while we're waiting for a question, which, I often, when I'm talking to high achieving students, undergraduate students, I'm often hearing that they don't know what they want to do, right? That they don't have this clear vision, mapped out for their life. I see we got a question. How did you determine your graduate course for the Rhodes? Yeah, so I'm going to kind of finish the piece of advice I was saying. I'll tie it into the answer to that question. Thank you. I would encourage you to think less about what is my ideal job. It's great if you have one envisioned. It's great if you know that you want to work on developing a vaccine for malaria. That's a highly specific career path. And a lot of applicants, most applicants don't have something that specific kind of mapped out. Instead, I would encourage you to think about two things. One is, why am I majoring in whatever it is that you're majoring in? What about that is appealing and interesting to me? And then what do I see as the biggest problem facing my community? And that can be your local community, that can be your state community, it can be your national community, it can be the international community. What problem do you really care about? And how can you think about working on that problem? It doesn't mean you need to have the solution, right? Nobody knows the solution to climate change, for example. And that's just one example. There's many, many problems, unfortunately, in the world, but it's up to you to pick, which one do I care about? So think maybe less about what is the ideal job and more, what do I care about? So for me, how did I determine my graduate course for the Rhodes? I kind of narrowed it down to two options very quickly. I was studying economics. I think I mentioned I changed majors as an undergraduate, which is kind of part of my personal statement, was that like I found this course really interesting and important, and I wrote about why that that was part of kind of my journey. As an Army officer, and we haven't talked a lot about my military career. As an Army officer, I knew that I was going to be deploying overseas to developing countries. And so I studied development studies. I got a master's in an MPhil, which is Master's of Philosophy. There's kind of two masters in the UK, Masters of Science and a Master's of Philosophy. It's not hard and fast rule, but generally an MPhil is 2 years and an MSc is 1 year, and an MPhil will involve a little bit of research and is more of a precursor to a doctorate. Which I did not get my doctorate in development studies. I went and got it in economics. I chose not to do the MPhil in economics because I wanted to do development studies. I wanted to take this more interdisciplinary approach, and I spent more time studying really anthropology and history while I was at Oxford, which was really fascinating. It was kind of in line with my undergraduate studies and my eventual PhD, my eventual doctorate, but not, it wasn't the exact same field. But it came back to, where do I see myself? What do I see as the biggest kind of problems facing my community right now? And, at the time, when I was applying, it was 2006. So this was before or at the beginning of the surge in Iraq. We were still in Afghanistan. I mean, these were like large scale ongoing conflicts, and we had General Petraeus had just published counterinsurgency doctrine, and it had become clear at that point, that we were not greeted as liberators in Iraq, that these wars were something of a quagmire, that they were not going well, and I faced a lot of questions about that in my interview. But this counterinsurgency doctrine, it was less about who is our enemy in a traditional sense and how do we, close with and destroy that enemy, and more about how do we work with a community to support that community to achieve its goals, it ties right into development. And so I wanted to go study, what do the experts think? The spoiler is that nobody really knows how development works. We understand a lot more than we did 20, 30 years ago. We know a lot of things that don't work, and that's valuable. I don't know how many of you are studying econ. Last year's Nobel Prize, and it's like Nobel season right now, but last year's Nobel Prize went to development economists who are really studying randomized controlled trials. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track. I thought about those problems. I thought about where I would fit in and what I wanted to actually spend my time doing. So the MPhil in econ, there's not really a lot of research involved. It's really the first 2 years of a PhD course, and a PhD in economics, the first 2 years is basically all math. So I didn't want to spend 2 years at Oxford doing problem sets, because for me, that would have made sense if I was going to go directly into a doctorate. But I knew because of my Army commitments that I would then have to go to the Army for a number of years. I served for 2009 so I spent 6 years in the operational Army before I went back to go get a doctorate. Thanks for the question. When you're thinking about, why Oxford, part of the story is that they have a program. Almost any program that they have is going to be highly ranked, but it's also, you could study it anywhere. So you want to be able to talk about, well, I want to go overseas. I want to represent America. I want to be a representative of my community. And I want to meet, you know, an international cohort of people who will themselves also be leaders. So I would lean heavily on this idea that the Rhodes Scholarship is a community. It's an international community. So there's 32 Americans, but there's, geez, I don't even know how many it is per year. I want to say it's about 100 a year. So, you know, Americans are in the minority. It's a large international group that you will interact with at Rhodes House. And then Oxford itself is highly international. So the graduate programs in particular, huge draw from all over the world in terms of who goes and studies there. Perhaps, you know, even more so than United States universities. The graduate students there are English graduate students, but not as many as you'd think. The undergraduates are majority English.
Okay, do we have other questions? I just thought of one that I think might be interesting for students is, how did you go about drafting your personal statement with the Rhodes policy of not being able to get feedback and input on it?
That policy didn't exist at the time, so I got a lot of feedback.
That's great. Good.
So that policy, actually, I think it was kind of put in place because so there's some universities that win a lot of Rhodes scholarships, like Harvard, Yale, actually West Point is one, and they have programs like this one where there's a little bit of guidance to help people, both to encourage people to apply who otherwise might not have. Like me, I never would have applied if an office like this one and seminars like this one did not exist, right? That really pushed me over the edge. It really brought me in and made me think maybe I could do it. So that policy was a reaction, I think, to, you know, others. They wanted more diversity in schools. They wanted to see people from different backgrounds, and they really wanted to be able to look at a personal statement and know that it was a personal statement, that it was crafted by that student. So they want your personality to come through, and your values and your interests and your history. So that the other thing I will tell you, I've told you many things. One more thing is that, you know, your story is good enough. Like, it may not seem interesting to you, but whatever your background is, wherever you come from, and whatever you're driven to do, you should have confidence in who you are, and not try to put forward some false front. Like, don't pretend that you're from an academic family if you're the first person to go to college. You know, lean into who you are. By the same token, like, if you do have parents who are professors, you know, that tell that story. Talk about their research interests and what you talked about at the dinner table and how that fed into, you know, your own interests. The important thing is to be really authentic and think deeply about, you know, where your values come from. I'm going to keep coming back to that, because your values are going to define the problem that you're most interested in and your approach to that problem. I know some of this sounds like really fuzzy stuff, but I think that's what's a little more unique about the Rhodes, is they're really leaning into that, fighting the world's fight, those kind of fuzzy things.
I think that's really, when you think about the beginning stages of writing a personal statement, I mean, it's hard, right? It's a challenge. It's hard to look at that first draft and imagine what it's going to look like at the end. Can you comment just briefly about, from what you remember about that process? I know wasn't yesterday, but if you think back to that first draft and how you felt about it, and how did you kind of stay motivated? How did it unfold for you?
So my initial draft was about a friend of mine who had passed away, and whenever we're dealing with grief, it sort of tends to dominate our emotional landscape, and so it was very hard for me to think about anything else. And I got some good advice that while this was important to my own development, it really wasn't the story of my life and the story of what it was that I was going to go do. So I think it was, it's important to get those first drafts out. It's important to get those words on the page, even if you're not getting somebody else to go back and read them. To get those 1,000 words, you're probably going to have to write 10,000 words. And even what is close to your final draft is probably going to be 1,800 words that you're then going to cut down to 1,000. Every sentence should be really communicating something. You don't have room for redundancy. You don't have room for throat clearing. And you really don't want to be telling. You want to be showing. You want to tell a story or a couple of stories that communicate a lot about, why you are who you are. It's not that there's some pivotal moment in your life. It's that this story it's representative of something that happened. It's representative of how you think about problems in a larger sense. I realize I'm being a little vague. I think that's by necessity. I see Sophia asked another question. How did receiving a Rhodes Scholarship change the course of your professional career? I would say changed it in several ways, a couple of which are unique to the Army. So in the Army, in particular, coming from West Point, at graduation, you also commission into the United States Army. And so I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and I did not report to, I was an aviator. So I mentioned both my parents were aviators. I also wanted to become a pilot, and I flew Black Hawk helicopters, but I did not report directly to flight school as would have been the case. I went to England for 2 years first, and then I went to flight school. And so it really delayed my entry into that part of my career. On the other hand, it changed the path of my career because it made that more of a detour as opposed to ultimately the sort of main thing that I do, because as I mentioned, this process of reflecting showed me that maybe I would want to go back to graduate school and get a PhD and become an analyst. So I'm still in the Army. I'm an assistant professor at West Point now, and I'm a research analyst for the Office of Economic and Manpower Analysis. What does that mean? It means I do it's almost like consulting, but it's with a strategic vision. So an example, the Army, for the Army, we have centralized promotion boards. And what that means is a lot of personnel information gets put into like a promotion packet. It's like a resume and your performance evaluations and awards and other information that then gets considered and essentially ranked. And some people get promoted and some people don't. Part of that packet for many years has been an official photograph. So I don't even know if it's legal for hiring and promotion processes in the United States to consider photographs, outside of the military. So I studied the effect of the photograph, and I did it using a randomized controlled trial using econometrics, and found that it harms minority candidates. And just this year, that research influenced the Department of Defense, and the photographs are now no longer being used to consider promotions in actually in any branch of the military. So that's not 100% due to me, but I played a small part in influencing the way that leaders in the military think about the promotion system and the sort of unintended side effects, I'll say, of the photograph. Being able to do that kind of research and influence policy is not I don't think I would have found myself in that position if I hadn't gone through this application process and if I hadn't ended up winning the Rhodes Scholarship. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. So I'm still in the Army. I'm a research analyst. I'm going to be doing that for a number of years, and hopefully, being able to carry on similar types of work, whether in or out of uniform in the long run.
Hey, do we have any other questions? Okay, well, we will wrap things up then. Thank you so much, Major Jassis, for being here, for speaking with our students. We really appreciate it. And to the students who've attended today, feel free to follow up with my office or with Dr. Arnold with questions. And look for that preliminary application later this spring, which we do at the end of May. So keep thinking about these scholarships, read about them, and the process is long, but it's worthwhile. All right, well, thank you so much. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say thank you to all of you for, for listening to me kind of jabber on and giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences. And to all of you students out there listening, you're more competitive than you think you are. And I really encourage you to think hard about whether you want to spend some time on this process.
Yes, absolutely. So, and don't talk yourself out of it, right? So that's the message is you
Exactly.
look at this. I talked myself out of things in college. I look back and I thought, I really should have applied for that grant, but I didn't, right? So you definitely won't get it if you don't apply. But if you apply, use the resources available to you. We're here to support you in your application. You will get to where you want to go, whether you get a fellowship along the way or not. So make use of the resources. You've done a good job by coming to this session to start out. So